Hey, what's up, nerds? It is Paul at Radio Free Hammer Hall. Today I thought I would talk about some observations that I've been making about the community in Warhammer the Old World and the differences between the sort of perspectives and mindset of players between the folks that have been um, in the Warhammer hobby for a long time and sort of, for want of a better word, checked out when Age of Sigmar came through and either went to Kings of War, Ninth Age, continued playing old editions of Warhammer, picked up the Warhammer Armies project somewhere along the lines. That group of people that basically said, okay, Games Workshop has killed Warhammer Fantasy. Age of Sigmar is not Warhammer, and so we're not going to play it, and we're just going to check out. And I'm not here to criticize or anything about that. I'm just here to make some observations about the difference between those folks that are, call them the old guard of Warhammer, and the people that are new to the old world, or people that had stuck with Age of Sigmar or had jumped into Age of Sigmar somewhere in the middle and are now also migrating over to the old world. And there's some very interesting differences to me in some perspectives. One of the things that really seems to pop up quite a bit is this idea of comping for events or just comping for games in general. And whether or not comp is necessary or good or bad is sort of a separate discussion. What I will note is that the people that are advocating for comping events or just comping games in general seem to just be those old guard players. And it got me to thinking about, like, why would that be? And I think it comes down to people have not been around and observing the evolution and changes from Games Workshop and how they are attending to games, what their release cycles are like, what the FAQ and errata cycles are like. The notion that there's even cycles at all of these things, both in Age of Sigmar and 40K, over the last, say, let's call it 10 years for round figures, they have gone from really just releasing things without announcing it any much further than, like, they're like, oh, in a week you're going to be able to pre-order this thing, and then a week after that it's going to launch, to now, like, we get a roadmap of like 9 to 12 months out with an idea of when there's going to be new books coming, when there's going to be new major releases coming, really telegraphing way ahead of time. And it's not necessarily giving you specifics, but as you get closer to things, you get more and more information. And in addition to that, we've gone from, with Age of Sigmar, it was launched without points in general. A year later, we got points and army composition added to the game. And then for a while, it was an annual cycle of points being updated. And then it was every 6 months. And now it's every 3 months. We have a quarterly cycle of them revisiting points values and making adjustments. Usually, I would say it's like 4 to 8 weeks probably after a new book launches. You get errata and FAQ specifically for that book that is going to make some updates if they made any errors in the release, or anything that really needed to be clarified. They fix it right away. And as things continue to evolve, they're tracking and paying attention to everything as it goes along and continually making adjustments and tweaks, as sort of like emergency patches in the middle when they recognize that something is getting out of hand and it needs to be fixed. There was, there were a few interesting comments that I've seen around, various social media sources Um, and every time it speaks to it, just people are just not aware of what's different now. I remember I commented on like one YouTube video, and it was like it was oh geez, I forget what exactly the topic was. Oh, it was the like the availability of models and the like print runs and things like that. And I basically said, Games Workshop has improved in a lot of ways. One of the things they still need some improvement on is, you know, getting their model supply correct at releases and after releases, lining up their expectations of what demand is going to be like and adequately supplying that. It's something that they're, I think, working on, but they're not there yet. And somebody's reply was like, "Oh, name one thing that Games Workshop has improved on. I'll wait." It's like, okay, they tell us releases ahead of time. They're constantly issuing FAQ and errata. They're constantly adjusting points. They're continually updating match play, giving us new releases, new like battle plans, scenarios, missions, whatever you want to call them in any individual game. Um, they're extremely responsive on social media. They are involved. They are monitoring things. They're um, they're paying attention and they're interacting with the community. It is not a black box anymore. They are not insular anymore. Um, you know, it, if you are a content creator and you have a decent following on, say, YouTube, or you have a decent following on a podcast, there's a very good chance that there is someone at Games Workshop in an influential position that is listening and watching and paying attention to what you're saying and taking those things into account and possibly using that to make changes and adjustments in whatever game it is that you're covering. That's a massive difference from where Games Workshop was before. In older editions of Warhammer Fantasy, 15, 20, 25 years ago, did they ever change points for an army after the initial book release? Or did you just have to deal with that for years until there was a new book released? And we just don't have that problem anymore. And I think when you start looking at these things, you begin to really understand that there's not so much of a need anymore, I don't think, for comp, because as Games Workshop gathers data, they're going to make changes. They're going to be proactive in these things and really strive to make the game better. And really one of the downsides of comping things is that for purposes of Games Workshop making those changes to the game, if you're running a comped event, that data isn't nearly as useful to them for making those adjustments in the future so that you don't actually need to comp things as much. And really, I think there's also just this instinct to comp stuff because historically you kind of needed to, right? So if you're going in without this foreknowledge of Games Workshop isn't the train wreck that it used to be, and they're actually really good about a lot of things now, and they're continuously improving and getting better, then you're going to have that idea of if the community doesn't fix it, who's going to? Because it ain't Games Workshop, right? But now the answer is, yeah, Games Workshop's going to fix it, and in order to make those changes, they need data to base it on. And there really is this other factor of the metagame's going to evolve over time, and there's going to be answers to things that you might think are broken now, as there is more innovation and communication and people talking to each other. One of the other big things compared to 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago, we've got this massive just information and communication dump on the internet constantly. the metagame is going to rapidly evolve constantly compared to what it used to do. So if there's a problem, people are going to figure out counters to it. If a counter exists, it will be implemented. People will do it. And it often is going to end up curbing the problem to a point. Just for the obligatory Magic the Gathering reference, when it gets really screwed up, you end up with affinity and anti-infinity affinity, and then, nothing else is viable. But that certainly can happen. But I think the odds are ever decreasing for that. So I think one of the things that I think, not one thing, the big point that I think I'd like to really make to folks is, if you are part of that old guard of Games Workshop, I would say, like, if you've been if you stepped back and weren't really involved in Games Workshop over the past 10 years in observing what they're doing, how they're operating now, I would say step back, take a look at it, and ask questions. Talk to the people that have been involved in Age of Sigmar and 40K over that period of time that you've been away from it, and try and get a better idea and evaluate for yourself of, like, reset those expectations. Because I think people are going in with a mindset based on old information. I certainly could be wrong about that, but it's just a pattern that I've noticed. And there's also, I think, I hate to kind of get into the more controversial territory, but there's people that are just still upset at Games Workshop over, blowing up the old world and going over to Age of Sigmar and all of the things that they have done in the past, because they have not always had the best business practices. They have not always been the best at running these games. And I think there's a lot of anchor bias that people come in with because of that. And I don't think that is, I don't mean that as a criticism of people. Those are very understandable things. I really just more want to share with people in an optimistic way. Guys, it's a lot different now. It's a lot better than it used to be. Are there still shortcomings? Absolutely. Are they still screwing stuff up? Absolutely. There are some absolute horror stories of dumb stuff, big mistakes that have happened to Age of Sigmar and 40K in the last 10 years. They've screwed some stuff up big time, but they've recovered. And I think that's really the key. And they're improving. So, without continuing to talk in circles and beat a dead horse, I'm just going to kind of leave it there and say, I think it's going to be really good for a lot of people to look at where Games Workshop is now, where they've come from, and that evolution and the trajectory that they're on, and reevaluate some of their thinking on some of these things. And will it change your mind? Maybe. Maybe not. I think the thought that there are people that have been in the hobby for a really long time, and therefore they have a lot of knowledge and experience, and they need to apply that to this to fix the game. I think the point, I think, for a lot of folks is that some of that knowledge is old and just needs to be updated. And again, without really getting specifically critical of any particular thing, I don't want to be out here bashing people, but I think there's some attitudes that need some adjustment. And, I want to see a good community built, and I think we're really on a good trajectory to do that. And yeah, I'm optimistic. And that's going to be it for now. I'll talk to you all later.